Hey, Good Wolf here, just a regular version today because I'm getting added to the 50-50 Lost pool. In 4.2 alongside Yunli and Argenti, Silverwolf will be joining Seele, Blade and Fushuan as limited banner Lost targets. Surely cost discussions will go smoothly. But today's video is going to be pretty interesting considering Seele got a Novaflare and so did Welt, and there's always that potential of keeping an E6 character in the pool. Sorry for being a bit late. I didn't want to talk about the Lost Pool without Novaflare info being out. There's a lot of new factors to think about because of them. Anyways, let's get to it. Our options in 4.2 are Silverwolf, Yunli, Argenti, Seele, Blade, Fushuan, Welt, Bronya, Bailu, Japad, Yanqing, Himiko, and finally, Clara. The first thing you should consider is if you like any of them. If you do, feel free to keep them. The first thing you should consider then meta-wise is if you have any of them E6 or at least maybe E4, E5. If that's the case, you might want to keep them in your standard pool, as losing to them twice past E6 would give a golden companion spirit, and those can be used to target specific 5-star shop characters. The shop isn't updated that frequently, but with the new addition of Robin and Huohuo, you have two solid new picks. And their E1s, as well as E2 for Robin in some cases, can also be nice to get. But you can always just hold on to them for the future shop additions too. If you don't like one of the better Lost Pool choices, putting an E6 or high Eidolon character in the pool in their slot is the best thing you can do. But in my opinion, some of these Lost choices are neat. If I'm on a new account, I would probably choose Silverwolf, Seele, Blade or Yunli, maybe Argenti, Fushuan, Welt, Bronya, Bailu, as we'd have two strong debuffers in Silverwolf and Welt, two strong carries with Seele and then Blade or Yunli, and then the two strongest sustains in the pool with Fushuan and Bailu. Since Huohuo is possibly free if you choose her over Robin, you could swap out Bailu. And if you chose Robin, I'd still keep Bronya here. Anyway, not everyone's new, so let's talk about these characters and who to pick. Let's first talk about the units I'd discard. First, Japad is just a really old sustain, and when Fushuan is in the pool, you might as well choose her instead for better utility. Secondly, Danheng PT is top tier for many teams and was completely free for a while, and even during 4.0, a patch in which a lot of beginners or returners would come back, and so you have another reason to ignore Japad. And a big part of 3.x's meta was HP based, and so the shielding from Japad is useless there as a free-to-play option versus Bailu in the same pool. Huohuo being a free shop choice in 4.2 is just a final nail in the coffin. Then Yanqing is just a terrible damage dealer, unfortunately. I hope he gets Novaflared one day, but his whole gimmick is so outdated, and his damage isn't even good enough to compensate for said gimmick. When you're up against limited units, two of those that were Novaflared, and then you have Yunli who can scale on Eidolons well, then you're already behind. I'd prefer just running E0 Welt as a carry over him post Novaflare. Then we have Clara, who is up against a literal Homelander copy of her with Yunli and faces the same problem Yanqing has. She doesn't have a useless gimmick like him, and her damage in some high attacking stages is okay, but the pool is so large now with much stronger characters that we definitely want to prioritize over her. Now, Himiko has seen a boost in power thanks to Firefly receiving new toys, but my only problem is Himiko is just yoinking Firefly's toys, and so if you have the Dahlia and Fugue, you probably pulled them for Firefly. If you don't have them, it's likely you're newer or skipped break, and so without them Himiko would be struggling similarly to other weaker DPS in this pool and should be skipped. So then we have 9 possible choices. Let's talk about the contested spots, the DPS spots. If you're doing fine on sustains, feel free to take more than one of them, I guess. Well, I think Seele is the best DPS here post Novaflare, so we'll keep her and talk about her after. Though DPS is always tricky because we're about to be in 4.2, the anniversary patch, with 2 new likely tier 0 DPS. And so outside of them being your favorites or needing another DPS for new players, none of these units are even worth considering most of the time over the new shiny OP DPS. Anyways, the second DPS spot is then between Blade, Yunli, Argenti. Blade is technically the best performing unit here at his peak, but you gotta remember that's with a premium HP team. Yunli and Argenti do not need Hyacinth E0S1 to perform even if they are weak. And if you do have said HP team, you just rock your Castrius or Avenite or whatever that you pulled them for. But I think he's still solid for the spot as Hoyo loves Blade, so maybe he'll get a renaissance again in the future. If you're new, you don't want to have to spend on all the banners, even if it's a Hyacinth one, to get your 50-50 Lost DPS up and running, and so I think I'd prefer Yunli for new players. Robin and Huohuo in the shop for free means we technically have Yunli, Robin, Sparkle, Huohuo, all free if you saved Golden Spirits from the previous lackluster shop edition with Topaz. DHPT over Ho also works without needing another spirit. And there you have a team that should beat out non-Tribi Hyacinth Blade teams even if it's not particularly strong right now. Yunli still won't carry you through content like a newer DPS would, but at least you'd have something if you're a new player, and her Eidolons are mostly decent, particularly that early E1. The only reason I also put Argenti here is if you're new and want a Pure Fiction specific DPS to help out, but Himiko would also work well in this spot, and otherwise you can ignore him, and many other DPS outperform him in Pure Fiction anyway. For regular players, this DPS spot would ideally be replaced, again, with a high Eidolon character from the pool, as an old DPS is not going to do anything for you, and Golden Companion Spirits would be much more useful. So we then have the 6 choices of Silwolf, Seele, Fushuan, Welt, Bronya, and Bailu. If you have competent sustains already, like you pulled Hyacinth and got Dan PT for free, there's likely going to be an Elation sustain too, or Horse potentially free. Well then Fushuan and Bailu can be ignored and replaced with high Eidolon characters from the pool as well. Fushuan has her E1 as a potential lost pool which gives you team-wide crit rate and now crit damage buffing sustain. If your team rotation doesn't get improved by Ho-Ho's energy and they don't care for attack, and she's an okay slot for new players, that's a very rare scenario though. Bailu is just here because she's better than Japad in terms of teams. She at least has Poverty Remembrance team she can run in before you get your Hyacinth. She cannot cleanse, but neither can Japad. Again, completely replaceable slot. And so we have the best 4 units here with Silwolf, Seele, Welt, and Bronya. Let's talk more about them. Silwolf is a premium debuffer unit and is a powerful 3rd slot in, for example, Archer teams, which are one of the strongest and cheapest teams right now if you've been playing since 3.x. In lower target fights, she is just as capable as other debuffers, and especially in off-element fights, she starts shining and becomes top tier. Her debuffs are all universal too, working for any possible damaging type composition in the game. Her damage amp when everything is combined is some of the strongest in the game, it's just she doesn't always get to use all of it, and a lot of it is subject to her acting and applying, as well as debuff duration, which means fast enemies or newly spawning enemies can hurt her uptime. Then you look at the classic Harmony characters where they can perma-buff you in most cases. But this all means she can kinda go in a lot of places as a generic amping support. Her E1 helps with more uptime, and her E2 improves on her amp, which should not be ignored, and it also makes her a really powerful slot in for Acheron teams. Both of these are nice to get, and past that you only get selfish Silwolf DPS Eidolons, though the E3 and E5 at least improve the amp a tiny bit, I guess. Now, Seele is back in a big way in 4.2, and so you probably had her on your last list already, but after the Nova, she should stay and actually maybe even bring you value. She got buffs to multipliers, buff uptime, she got more self buffs in general, and she has extra attacks on top of all that. Her core problems don't get fixed, and so I don't think she will stay in her new awesome state forever, but in a niche where she can ramp up on constant enemy spawns, like Pure Fiction or some specific boss fights, she can clear really well right now, and should for a decent while, especially if optimized, and having that for new players is not bad as a potential 50-50 loss. Not only that, but her E1 got a buff, it's still conditionally annoying, but if it's up, for example versus bosses, it's an okay amount of damage amp. Her E6 is also really good now in scenarios where you can't one-shot the enemy, especially with some high attacking teams, so that's nice if you previously had a high amount of Eidolons on her. Speaking of Novaflares, Welty here also got one. He came back from the forgotten depths of the meta, and now does damage again, he supports again, and he can even delay enemies with resistance thanks to his new gimmick. Unfortunately, his weird stat juggling remains, as well as ult uptime issues, so you will have to sacrifice his newly buffed damage if you want actual supporting and survivability in your teams. I think you ideally want his E2 to start really seeing his effectiveness in helping survivability and supporting consistently, and even then a lot of teams can't use him well. So you'd want E4 for supporting most carries, and if you want him to truly shine as a carry. But he's a versatile unit to lose to, and stacking up those Eidolons slowly will let you eventually have a beast. Remember, he's also in the standard banner. And finally, we have Bronya. Sparkle came out and she still had her uses. Sunday came out and she still had her uses. Same with RMC, same with Sparkle Novaflare. Is it mostly for 0 cycles to reduce limited cost? Maybe, but for new players, she can be a treat. Her full action advance will never be useless, and she's Harmony, so she has the cheeky hack of being able to use DDD for optimized clears. She's also able to advance Harmonies, which still gives her a niche. Her E1 is always nice for better SP economy. Her E2 can allow for attack boots DPS rather than tuning them to 135, which is indirectly more amp. Her E4 can be useful for energy and some units, and finally E6 at the end opens up new synergies. Losing to her isn't as peak as it used to be, but it's much better than a lot of these pool units. So again, new players, I'd recommend this 50-50 Lost Pool lineup, with many slots being replaceable depending on how new you are and what your pool plans are. And then for older players, I'd focus on high Eidolon characters as well as generically good characters, the Welt, Silver, and if you want a DPS, Seele. But let me know who you'll end up picking from this new batch of Lost Pool units. I'm excited to see who they add next, and them adding Blade and Seele and then Nova playing them both, as well as adding post-Nova Silverwolf, has my hopes up for other units here. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, thank you to my amazing YouTube members, and have a Guoba day.